Negotiations between the White House and Congress for coronavirus relief remain stalled. There are now mounting calls for lawmakers to delay a planned August recess. Skyler Henry has the latest.
The White House press secretary pushed back on criticism that the president is not visible enough during coronavirus relief negotiations on Capitol Hill and blamed the Democrats for lack of a deal.
He's regularly updated. Right now, the Democrats are being fundamentally unserious.
Democratic leaders are sidestepping those attacks, instead putting the blame on Senate Republicans.
After a week of stalled talks, because Republicans could not articulate a position on hardly anything, I believe we're making progress.
The Treasury Secretary and White House Chief of Staff continued talks on Capitol Hill, meeting separately with Democrats and Senate Republicans.
I don't think we're going to have a total consensus in this round. The atmosphere is much more partisan.
Demands are growing for the Senate to consider postponing its planned recess next week until a deal is reached.
I think we ought to stay until we get a deal done.
The biggest sticking point in these negotiations continues to be the now expired enhanced unemployment payments as well as eviction relief. President Trump says he may use executive action to extend eviction protections.
I want to do that. I don't want people to be evicted.
In a sometimes confrontational interview with Axios, the president defended his administration's handling of the pandemic.
1,000 Americans are dying a day.
They are dying. That's true. And it is what it is. But that doesn't mean we aren't doing everything we can. It's under control as much as you can control it.
The president has authorized the National Guard to continue pandemic response duties through the end of 2020. The federal government will continue to pay 100% of the deployment costs for Texas and Florida, but the administration is demanding other cash-strapped states now pick up 25% of the tab.
Skyler Henry joins me now from the White House. Hi, Skyler. So on Monday, House Speaker Pelosi said we may not see a resolution until next week. Are lawmakers any closer to reaching an agreement on the next phase of coronavirus relief?
Well, the good news here, Tanya, is that Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows said that there was significant progress made today in terms of the negotiations with the top Democrats in terms of this next round of coronavirus relief. The bad news is they still say that there's still a ways to go before anything concrete comes of it, but they have created some sort of timeline in order to try to track the progress here. They're hoping to get something done by the end of this week so that Congress can vote on the bill next week. Obviously, a point of contention right now is that unemployment insurance benefits that expired for many Americans last week. That is something that we've seen Democrats kind of stand firm with in terms of them wanting $600 of enhanced checks go to those who are unemployed due to the coronavirus pandemic. We've heard from Republicans who've said that they want to slash those numbers to about $200 or so. And so right now, both sides have kind of dug their feet into the sand here, so to speak, in terms of not really wanting to budge on that issue in and of itself. But we also did hear that both sides want to address eviction relief as well. Obviously, many areas are, in terms of the eviction moratoriums, those are wrapped up last week as well. And so now tens of millions of people, some 40+ million people, run the risk of being evicted, if not this month, the next. So that is where we're starting to see a little bit of the buzz. But we did hear from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell as well today. He said that there's still some disagreements amongst members of the GOP in terms of what they want to see from this bill. He doesn't believe that, to use his words, there will be a full kumbaya moment, as we saw earlier this year, in terms of getting other coronavirus relief measures passed to try to get out money to the American people. But he did say that the goal here is to work out something as soon as possible.
That's right, getting down to the wire. Now, Skyler, the president is saying he believes the pandemic is under control. In an interview, he told Axios that 1,000 Americans dying from the virus daily, quote, is what it is. How has this been received? And is this in line with the messaging we've been seeing coming out of the White House?
Well, based off of social media, the 150,000 some odd people who've lost their lives to the coronavirus, their families have said different things. Obviously, that it is what it is not the best messaging in terms of what was the appropriate response to the coronavirus, but the Trump administration, particularly the president, he stands by his position that if he didn't do what he did, particularly as it pertains to blocking off travel to foreign countries, China and Europe, he feels as though millions more people would have succumbed to this coronavirus, and he feels as though that should kind of be viewed with an appropriate lens there. His critics will say that, no, the testing hasn't been what it should be, but the Trump administration will say, hey, listen, there has never been mass testing for a virus that we've never seen before, and so the president deserves some sort of credit for getting that up and running and rolled out. Obviously, there was a few stumbling blocks and hurdles in terms of its efficiency, and we're still seeing lagging result times in terms of people going to get their tests and how long it takes to get those tests back. But the president maintains that that is something that he should be rewarded for, or at least complimented for, to say that, hey, listen, we are addressing testing. We are doing everything that needs to be done to try and make sure that people aren't contracting this coronavirus. The president also said that, and this is something that we've heard before, right, Tanya, is that, you know, the more testing that is done across the country, that will show the more amount of results, obviously comparing it to other countries around the world there, saying that those other countries aren't testing nearly as much as America, and so they aren't seeing nearly as much results of the coronavirus. But then you have critics to say, no, this is what's happening here, is that there's starting to be a spread of the coronavirus, something that we haven't seen. We heard from Dr. Debbie Birx earlier, a few days ago, who said that, no, this isn't what we saw in March or April. This is something entirely different, where urban and rural communities are impacted by this. And so now there needs to be more appropriate measures in place.
Okay, Skyler, shifting gears now, looking ahead to the November election, the Trump campaign resumed TV advertising Monday after a campaign reset. What is the strategy now, just 3 months away from the election?
Yeah, to target the battleground area. So we're talking about North Carolina, we're talking about Georgia, we're talking about Florida, just to name a few of the states that these ads are being launched in. These are states that pollsters say are marginally and uncomfortably close as it pertains to where the president's polling numbers have been and where his opponent, the presumptive Democratic nominee, Vice President Joe Biden, those numbers are starting to get even in those battleground states, particularly in a state like Texas. And so what you're starting to see is that he wants to get those messages out there. And he's also speaking about the silent majority. This is something that the president has mentioned time and time again, talking about the large numbers of people who will come out on election day and vote for the president, people who may not be accounted for in these pollings. And so he feels as though there is going to be a significant wave of people that are going to vote for him in November. But still, though, the campaign is still finding it necessary to throw millions of dollars at this and obviously target these battleground states where the former vice president is starting to gain in terms of momentum, in terms of support. Ironically, or maybe not ironically, they just happen to be states that are suffering from spikes of the coronavirus. And so a lot of the voters are saying that they feel as though the president hasn't handled the coronavirus as well as could have been. And perhaps are saying maybe, well, we'd rather vote for Joe Biden to see what he can do. And so I think that is where you're starting to see some of the messaging change there. But though the president's campaign obviously focused on these battleground states to try to make sure that he gets as much voter attention as possible from those areas.
And Skyler, another place the president's messaging seems to be changing somewhat is in Florida when it comes to absentee ballots. The president is urging Florida voters to use absentee ballots after weeks of criticizing mail-in voting. How is he explaining this change in messaging? And does it just apply to Florida?
Well, yeah, so this whole time, I think a lot of people have just been trying to differentiate the difference between mail-in voting, absentee voting. And so what's going on here, I wouldn't call it a backtrack, so to speak, in terms of the president's rhetoric. But what's happening here is that what we've heard from several Republican officials across the country is that it's not really helping the Trump campaign to throw this rhetoric out there without being as specific as possible, because now what's ultimately happening here is that you're starting to see a lot of Republican voters say that they don't trust mail-in voting, absentee voting altogether, where, absentee voting is something that the president does, that the press secretary does, and so there needs to be a more honed-in approach of how the president puts out this rhetoric of why he feels as though mail-in voting would be fraudulent. Obviously, that has been disproven. A lot of experts have said that they feel as though mail-in voting is actually one of the more safer ways to vote here. So that's where I think that you're starting to see a bit of change from the president, particularly as it pertains to his tone with mail-in voting. We did hear from White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany earlier today, who's had a similar rhetoric as well. But I think the big focus here is if they're going to target mail-in voting, be very specific as to why they feel as though it won't be an appropriate measure come the November elections.
All right. Well, Skyler Henry at the White House, thank you so much.
All right, Tanya, thanks.